Okay, we're once again being joined by Mike Schreiner. Good morning, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, good morning, Adam. Always a pleasure to join you.
I want to start here first, just like talking a bit about procedure because we're talking right now because next week or the week after the legislature goes back, and then it's 8 weeks. Although it's technically till June, it's only like really 8 weeks of sitting. And I know that a lot of people will joke or perhaps even seriously think like you guys aren't working when you're not in the legislature, but um, in terms of like the real impact on the legislative work that you do. Uh, what does 8 weeks mean, and what do you lose only sitting for 8 weeks down at Queen's Park?
Well, Adam, it's a direct threat to democracy. And I want to be very clear, MPPs from all parties are working hard when we're not at Queen's Park. As a matter of fact, sometimes, especially if you're a party leader like myself, you work harder when you're not at Queen's Park because you're traveling around so much. So, I early start to my day in Guelph today, and I end up late tonight down in Norfolk County on a roundtable talking about protecting farmland. And then by the time I get back to Guelph, it's going to be pretty late. So no rest, no rest. But I'm not complaining because I love my job. So the impact of us not being at Queen's Park to me is less about how it impacts MPPs and more about how it impacts democracy. Because what's going to happen is exactly what the Ford government did last fall, is they used what's called a time allocation motion to quickly ram through lots of pieces of legislation, skipping debate, and most importantly, skipping the committee process, which basically means that the people don't have a chance to come to Queen's Park and provide their input on legislation. I mean, we have a process set up where a bill is introduced, it's debated at second reading, then it goes to committee, and the public has an opportunity to have their voice heard. And oftentimes, you want legislation to be amended because, no one, including Mike Schreiner, I'll be the first to say, I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything. Like, I couldn't do my job without input from lots of people. And that's what the committee process is all about. And by the Ford government skipping that or, shortening it, it just means that it short circuits democracy. It means people don't have a voice, and it means mistakes will be made and have been made by the Ford government. And, the thing that infuriates me the most about this, so much to the legislation the Ford government is ramming through. They keep saying, "Oh, we need this to fight back against Trump." Well, you know what? By short-circuiting democracy, you're acting like Trump, and you can't push
Mm,
back against Trump if you're going to act like Trump.
no, for sure. And I'll let people decide whether or not that's intentional or not. But the other piece of this, before I get into like the meat of what I really want to talk to you about, over the weekend we heard about this latest addition, potential addition to Ontario Place about building a new convention center on artificial islands. I want to pick your brain from the environmental side of it because I've heard things about the risks of like dumping dirt from other places into the lake and then building stuff on top of it, especially convention centers would have like huge parking demands as well. Can you talk a bit about the environmental concerns of this latest proposal? Let's call it a proposal from that point of view, and I mean just how like arbitrary this all seems, this massive redevelopment plan.
Well, to take dirt that likely has toxins in it, dump it into Lake Ontario is an environmental disaster, and it's only going to continue to increase contamination in Lake Ontario, and especially along the Toronto waterfront, which, give credit to the city of Toronto, the province of Ontario, the federal government have all worked together to clean up Lake Ontario where people can actually start swimming in the lake again and feel safe. And so for the Ford government to undermine that and threaten that for some mega project that puts the premier's own vanity and the interests of the wealthy and well connected before everyday Ontarians is outrageous. At a time when people are struggling to put food on the table, afford a roof over their head, he's just made changes to the OSAP program. So university students now are going to be, graduating with more debt. We have unprecedented number of people in Ontario's history, 85,000 experiencing homelessness. You have emergency department closures across the province, especially in rural communities. 60% of hospitals in the province of Ontario are taking out lines of credit to meet payroll. And the
Mm.
premier has the audacity to suggest he's going to spend, two, three, $4 billion building an island in Lake Ontario for some convention center that Toronto doesn't need. It already has one. Why not just fix the one you've got? To me, it's just infuriating. And then you combine that with this ridiculous tunnel under the 401, the 2.2 billion going to the mega luxury spa, and over again, it's clear that Doug Ford puts the interest of a handful of wealthy, well-connected insiders ahead of the people of Ontario. It has to stop. I'm going to continue fighting against it when we get back to Queen's Park.
You've been in a lot of convention centers, right?
I have been.
Would you say the Metro Toronto Convention Center is about the same in quality as other convention centers?
Yeah, I would say that it does need a little bit of upgrading because
Right.
there's this bizarre design to it of like all these escalators you're going up and down. You don't know what level you're on. And so it's like, you can fix that. Like, fix it. There's already parking there. I don't even know where people are going to park with a convention center in the middle of Lake Ontario. So maybe Doug's going to build such great transit that we don't need to drive to it, which that would make it a unique convention center. Something tells me that isn't in Doug Ford's mojo. So, you know what? Fix the one we have. Just fix it. Plus, you've got the convention center that's at the CNE grounds, which is pretty
Mm.
good.
Yeah.
Like, the Royal Winter Fair is held there. Like, all kinds of trade shows are held there. I go there a lot for these things. It's good. The convention center, downtown on Front Street, it needs fixed up. There's no doubt about it. But you could do that at a far less cost than this ridiculous idea of building Fantasy Island in Lake Ontario.
Fantasy Island. I like it. I want to direct us back to a matter of local democracy because I think this ties into it in a very particular way. The takeover of the school boards. There are elections this year for school board trustees. The French, English, Catholic, and separate, all of them. We elect the school board trustees. I think it's safe to say now most, or a plurality of Ontario students now live in schools that are managed by these supervisors. Eight of them, eight of the boards are managed in total: Peel, York, Toronto, Ottawa. Do you have any idea what like is coming? Like, has there been any communication with the Ministry of Education? Because I mean, to say that we're going to get rid of school board trustees and change the way schools are managed in Ontario seems like a massive thing to just sort of drop on you when like day one or two when you get back to the legislature. Like, do you have any idea what's coming?
So, Adam, I have no idea, but I will tell you in debate in the House, when I was accusing the government of wanting to eliminate school boards, the education minister was in the House, took issue with me, and during an exchange during the debate, confirmed that they were not going to get rid of school boards. Now, he
Hmm.
did not say he would not get rid of trustees. So it'd be interesting to see what that looks like. But I can tell you that, conservatives in Ontario, a certain section of the conservative movement, has wanted to get rid of school boards since the 1990s and Mike Harris days. I've heard some members, staff of that government said one of their biggest regrets is they never got rid of school boards back then. So I think it's definitely been on the conservative agenda since then. I mean, school board trustees, the oldest form of democracy in Ontario. I mean, we were electing school board trustees before we were ever electing municipal councillors and MPPs and MPs. And I think having that local control and decision making is really important. And one of the things I've said to my MPP colleagues, especially in the Conservative caucus, is um, if you think you get a lot of parents reaching out to you about education issues now, wait till they don't have a local school board trustee to reach out to. MPP offices are going to be inundated with this. Which is fine, which is fine. I mean, I'm not saying I don't want people to reach out to me. I do want people to reach out to me, but local school board trustees play a really important role. They give parents and students a voice. They give the community a voice. They ensure that decisions aren't being made, out of the ministry in Toronto, but actually have local concerns guide decision making. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I think it's good that parents have a local elected official to go to make sure their voice is heard. And for the government to take that away, I think, again, it's just another example of how the Ford government is just chipping away and eroding democracy. I think Doug Ford's vision of democracy is people get to mark a ballot every 4 years, and then he doesn't want to hear from you. And
Mm,
that isn't how democracy works. Like voting is a vital and critical and very important role that we all play in democracy, but citizen engagement, citizen voices, people having a say in government, every day, not just on election day, is critically important to democracy. And for the Ford government to take that away, I think it's wrong. And it's not clear to me that these administrators that the education minister is appointing is doing any better job than the school boards were doing. So I don't even at this point see an improvement in what's happening. Those few school board trustees who have abused the system, like, this ridiculous trip that was taken, to buy art in Italy,
right.
like things like that. Yeah. Should they be reprimanded for that? Absolutely. Should those trustees repay the money that they shouldn't have spent on that trip? 100%. Does that mean you get rid of democracy? No.
I mean, there is room for improvement, is what you're saying, and I think what looking up the road in Waterloo region, there's sometimes some dysfunction that overflows
Yep.
into the public discourse. Our own local school board here in Guelph, the Upper Grand, has been essentially called out for having gaps in their human rights policy, and they undertook a process to try and address that. Um, but there is room for improvement, right? And in terms of like how we can, and the other thing I would also say is I think Doug Ford is betting on, there's so few people vote for in the school board elections, even fewer than vote in, municipal council elections or for the mayor, that people aren't going to care. But, is there a piece of this where you can work with the government to say, like, what are areas we can improve, like public engagement and public participation in our school boards, and still hold on to a system of like local accountability?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there can be reforms made to the way school boards work, the accountability mechanisms that school board trustees have. I mean, having a more rigorous, like integrity commissioner kind of system that would, oversee and ensure that we don't have the kinds of abuses that, we've had a few instances of here in Ontario. I mean, if you listen to some of the rhetoric from conservatives, is they've said, well, these school board trustees are just a bunch of progressives who, want to build a name for themselves and run for elected office to be an P or an MP. And so one, that's just not a reason to get rid of school boards. And two, um, maybe democracy and governance is strengthened if somebody starts out as a school board trustee and, learn what their community needs and wants and learns how governance works and then maybe takes that experience to another level of government. So I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing. And, I think you have people from all political backgrounds who run as school board trustees. So I don't think any one political party or political movement dominates that. And certainly in a democracy, anyone has the opportunity to do it. I find most school board trustees and my interaction with them are nonpartisan. They
Mm.
operate in a nonpartisan way and are there because they truly care about education. They care about kids. They care about their community and they want to make a difference and they want to improve education. And so having that local voice, I think, is critically important. Having more democracy is better than less democracy. And I don't understand why the Ford government doesn't believe in that, but they simply don't.
Well, hopefully this is democracy in action, this next point, because we've certainly seen a lot of protests in the last couple of weeks about the cuts in OSAP grants, increase in OSAP loans. likely maxing out tuition increases for next year after a freeze. I mean, the freezing the tuition in the last 8 years has largely been driven by like we don't like the appearance of that, and there's certainly a political angle, and we've seen things like the Student Choice Initiative, brick wall in the court process. What do you think the odds are that there's room for persuasion here? I mean, even just from like the purely economic standpoint, that we're in a situation where generation of young people emerging from post-secondary, deeply in debt already, can't find work, can't afford a home, can't start careers, can't start families. And also we can add worried about the future, climate change, etc. But is there room for persuasion here that the government can increase education funding without doing that on the backs of young people?
I don't know if there's room for persuasion with the Ford government because Doug Ford simply doesn't see the value of post-secondary education. I mean, he's been attacking it, post-secondary education, since the day he was elected. Ontario has the lowest per student funding for the post-secondary sector of any province in the country. It undermines our economy. It undermines people's quality of life. It undermines the ability of young people to get ahead in the world. And I really appreciate the way you preface this question because I would have answered it with that. Um, Young people right now in Ontario are facing, I think, the hardest start to life of any generation, at least in my lifetime. But I would say, go back decades and decades. The first generation looking at their standard of living more than not likely to be lower than their parents. And you've nailed it. Like, unemployment rate at recessionary levels, 16.5%, the worst housing crisis in Ontario's history, a job market that is completely being transformed by automation and AI. We got wars happening all over the world right now. You got the climate
Hmm.
crisis bearing down on people. You have an unprecedented number of people struggling to put a roof over their head and food on the table. And now Doug Ford is saying that young people are going to have to bear the burden of this. So the wealthy and well connected can, get tax cuts and not properly spend on public services. Like that's just outrageous. Like I understand why so many young people are so angry and I understand why the protests are happening. I'm going to be doing everything I can to support college and university students to push back against this. It's Doug Ford who has created the crisis in our post-secondary education sector by refusing to fund it properly. By refusing to fund it properly. So instead of taking responsibility for it, he does what he always does. And I'm sure we're going to talk about housing and homelessness soon because he's done the exact same thing with the housing crisis. Instead of looking in the mirror and looking at how his policies have created this crisis, he's blaming young people and he's going to make young people pay the price for it with more debt. That is not the legacy I want to leave for my children. That's not the future I want my kids to have. I don't want my kids living in my basement and struggling to find a good paying job even though they have university degrees. But that's the world Doug Ford is creating. And I'm going to stand with students, I'm going to stand with families, I'm going to stand with everyday people and push back against this.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the other piece of this, and you teed it up, is um, the argument that the housing side of this, and certainly we've needed more housing for a while, but now there's another part of this now, and I've seen it unfold at Guelph City Council, and I'm sure you've seen it unfold in various councils across Ontario, that the fiscal pressure on municipalities from downloading, and it's not just the housing file and cutting DCs and cutting planning fees, but like telling municipalities you need to fund more police for school resource officers or for court security. Is there room for persuasion here? Because I mean, forget about ideology for a sec. So many of the people occupying the conservative bench, including the premier himself, used to be members of municipal councils or mayors themselves. They should know about these challenges firsthand, these systemic challenges. And it just seems to be getting louder and louder. And even, I'm sure you've heard this from developers in our community as well. They don't like trying to predict a real estate market or building in a real estate market where the government might change the rules again in 6 months and send them back to the drawing board, even if it advantages them in some way with, cheaper builds or cheaper land or whatever. Is there room for persuasion here? Um, at least to get to the government to calm the chaos down or to rein in the chaos of these constant changes. And, I realize that they want to be seen doing something, even if it, you know, is undoing or redoing something they did 6 months ago. But I mean, the chaos seems to be the problem, right?
The chaos is the problem, and the premier doesn't get it, Adam. Every time, almost every question I ask at Queen's Park is about the housing crisis because it's the number one issue people in Guelph bring to my office. And it's been a high priority for me. And just really quick as an aside, when people say, "Oh, Mike, you're the climate guy. How come you're talking about the housing crisis?"
Right.
The biggest driver of climate pollution in Ontario is low density sprawl and the long, expensive commutes it forces on families. So I would argue it is a climate issue for those who ask sometimes. But the premier always says, well, we've passed, like 8, 9 housing bills, more housing bills than any government in Ontario history. And you voted against all of them. And I'm like, why would I vote for housing policy that actually doesn't work, that has
Mm,
led to the worst housing crisis in Ontario's history? It is a direct result of the policies of the Ford government. And a big driver of that is the fact that they've passed like 8 or 9 housing laws. Like the law keeps changing all the time. So nobody knows what the rules are in Ontario or what the rules are going to be. I'll give you just one example. When the premier floats ideas like, oh, hey, we're going to take HST off of all new home construction, or we're going to remove development charges, all of a sudden, it freezes the market.
right.
So the reason housing starts are up in every province in the country except for Ontario is the chaos Ford has created. The example I just gave you, a lot of home buyers are saying, well, why would I buy a house now? Because the HST may come off of these sometime in the future. So why would I buy it now? Developers are going, oh, yeah, man, we've got approvals to do this development. And we hear about it all the time in Guelph. Hey, all these approvals are made. But if you're a developer and they're saying, like, hey, we may remove DCs, well, maybe you're going to not do anything until they actually remove the development charges. So all this uncertainty that's been created by the Ford government is just freezing the housing market in Ontario, both in terms of building and buying. And so I just feel for municipalities, and I keep telling mayors, start calling these huge property tax increases the Doug Ford tax increase, because so much of it's being driven by downloading onto municipalities and the chaos the premier's creating in the housing market, which is, maintaining infrastructure for roads, bridges, housing enabling, all of that, and actually the housing crisis itself are the two biggest challenges municipalities are facing. The Financial Accountability Officer of Ontario just came out with a report looking at spending on housing. And you would think the province, because the province has the most control over housing of
Mm,
any level of government, would spend the most on housing. It's not. They spend the least, like 13%. 57, almost 60% of housing costs are on the backs of municipalities, and the federal government covers off the rest. Property taxes were never designed for this.
right.
If you rightfully are angry in Guelph, and it's not just Guelph, it's every city in Ontario, it's even worse in a lot of smaller rural municipalities. The percentage property tax increase we're facing is a direct result of Doug Ford's policies. So stop complaining to your councillors and the mayor and target the source of the problem, which is the Ford government. Because for some reason, the Ford government has been able to, avoid accountability on this. Like just the other day, the premier was like, well, if I was the mayor of all these cities, like I wouldn't be having all these tax increases. And I'm like, well, maybe that would be good because you would not be the premier anymore, forcing all these tax increases on municipalities. So maybe that would get us to the point where we wouldn't be having these huge property tax increases in every city across the province. And so I'm just calling on people we need people power to speak out right now. As an opposition member, as a leader of an opposition party, I'm going to continue to push the Ford government, hold them accountable. But I think what we've learned from the Greenbelt scandal, when the premier backed off and reversed himself on the $8.3 billion Greenbelt scandal, when the premier reversed himself on, attacking the wages of the, lowest wage education workers. It was people power. It was
Yeah.
people pushing back in conjunction and cooperation and collaboration with MPPs like myself, that force the government to reverse themselves. That's what it's going to take. That is what it's going to take for a new deal for cities and towns in this province, a new fiscal framework that actually is financially sustainable, especially for municipalities, especially for people paying property taxes. And sometimes people say to me, well, Mike, that's a homeowner issue. No, it's a tenant issue as well,
Yeah.
because when landlords have to face higher property taxes, that gets passed on to tenants through rents. Small businesses struggling to survive in our communities, when they have to pay more in property taxes, that affects, the cost of the goods that they sell you. So we're all being hurt by these property tax increases that are being pushed on us by the Ford government, and it's primarily driven by a premier who wants to protect the wealthy and well-connected, and everyday people are paying the price.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a busy 8 weeks. We'll have to have Mike on again to tell us what he really thinks. But for now, Mike Schreiner, thank you so much for joining us again.
Hey, Adam, always appreciate it. And just a big shout out to everyone. This particular form of local journalism, all forms of local journalism, please support. We need a stronger local journalism in every community in Ontario. So thank you for the work you do.
I wasn't fishing for that, but thank you for for saying that.